Okay, and welcome again. In this video, we're going to start to talk about the process of completing the square. Completing the square is a method that we're going to actually use to solve polynomial equations. In previous videos, we looked at solving equations by making use of a square root property. And we're going to actually kind of piggyback onto that, but first we have to discuss this process of completing the square. So the idea is that if we take a polynomial like x plus b and we square it. Now remember that means multiply it times itself. Now when you FOIL that out or multiply that out, you're going to get something of the form x squared plus 2bx plus b squared. It will always fit that format. So as an example, consider x plus 3 squared. If you multiplied x plus 3 times x plus 3 and simplified, you get x squared plus 6 plus 9. The 6 comes from being 2 times 3. The 9 is 3 squared. As another example, x minus 4 squared, if you multiplied that out, would be x squared minus 8x plus 16. The minus 8 comes because it's 2 times negative 4. It would be negative 8x. The 16 comes because if you take negative 4, square it, you'll get positive 16. Okay, so our goal is going to be this. We're going to have part of one of these squared polynomials, but we need to find the missing part. Particularly, we're going to have the x terms, the x squared term and the x term, and we're going to need to figure out what the number term would have to be so that it would be a perfect square. And you're going to see the real use for one of the real uses for this process in an upcoming video. So for example, if we had x squared plus 20x, we'd like to figure out what number would have to go there to make this thing one of these perfect squared polynomials, like the x squared plus 6x plus 9 or the x squared minus 8x plus 16. And so when you go back to this formula here, this is the idea here. In the formula it was x plus b times x plus b. So notice the formula here calls for the middle term to be 2 times whatever that b is. And then add on that b squared. So if we knew what the b was, then we could know what number it would add on. It would be b squared. So the way we find the number is by saying, well, our 20x is the middle term. That's got to be the same as that 2b. So setting 2b equal to 20, we're able to find that b would have to be 10. And again, once we know what b is, we know what number we need to add. So in other words, we add b squared, which is equal to 100. So we could write that down as x squared plus 20x plus 100. And then because that is a perfect square, it could also be factored as x plus 10. X plus b, because b is equal to 10. Okay, so we're going to move on now and look at a couple more examples of using this process. So we're here asked to complete the square and factor. So our first polynomial is x squared minus 16x plus blank. So again, we need to figure out the blank. So just like we did last time, we can say, well, 2b would have to be equal to that middle number, negative 16. And solving that equation gives me b equals negative 18. And then to complete the square, sorry, not negative 18, negative 8, sorry. And then we square that thing, negative 8 squared would be 64. That's the thing we need to add to make this into a perfect square. And then once we do that, we can factor that as x minus 8 quantity squared. It's minus because the b is negative. Okay. This next one's a little bit harder, gives people a little bit more trouble, but the process is no different. 2b still has to be that middle term, the 3. So, excuse me. Sorry, we need to divide by 2, we get b equals 3/2. Well, we can square the fraction 3/2 just the same as we can square the number -8. So 3/2 squared would be 3 times 3 would be 9. 2 times 2 would be 4. That's what we're going to put there. And again, once we've done that, we can square, or we can factor it as x plus 3/2 squared. Okay, one more example. This time our coefficient's a fraction. Well, before I solve the equation 2b equals a fraction, understand what's going on here. In each case, we're dividing by 2. I really don't want to divide fractions, but realize that dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. So essentially what we have to do in each case when we want to find b is we take that coefficient and multiply it by 1/2, or divide by 2, whichever way you want to think of it. They're both the same thing. And so we get that b is going to be equal to 3 out of 10. And again, like we did in the problems before, once we know that b is 3 out of 10, we can square it to find out that what we need to add to make this a perfect square. And so we put our 9 out of 100 there, and then we can factor it as x plus 3 out of 10 quantity squared. Okay, in the next video, we're going to actually talk about how we can use this completing the square to solve equations. Until then.